Hello and welcome to When Sasquatch Attacks Part 2. Last week we started our journey into the mysterious realm of Bigfoot that are known to be particularly aggressive. During writing the script of that video, I posed a lot of questions about why such activity has for the most part ceased to exist due to reports stemming from the 1800s and early 1900s. Within this I proposed educated explanations as to why this was, due to known animal behavior, and even how humans react when their livelihood is threatened. Of course, I had to edit this all out after I stumbled across more recent activity. So that is what this video encompasses today. One such report even gives fuel to the fire of why there never is a body of a Sasquatch found. No, this time it doesn't involve the government. In case you are curious, I do frequently publish my unedited scripts and sometimes extended videos on my Patreon page, for any of you who may be interested in seeing what didn't make it into the final upload. I will provide a link to that in the description. At the end of this, I have special information relating to the announcement I made in the previous video, so stay tuned. Starting off with quite a big tale of an overly aggressive Sasquatch, we find a story from the 1970s. I will first tell you the story and then address some of the skeptic remarks about it, as I do have information to share that could help. According to the story, a man named Lewis Rich Grumley, who at a later date was at one time the director of the California Bigfoot organization, was working as a security guard for the construction of high-tension lines in California. During this time, he met a bulldozer operator who was working at the site, who is simply referred to as Cat Skinner. Since his name is never mentioned, I will refer to him as CS for short. After some time, the two started talking about their travels and hunts in the surrounding areas, when the subject of Bigfoot came up. This is when CS told a tale that was quite fantastic and filled with mystery. According to him, during the 70s, he was in Bishop, California, which is located in Inyo County. A friend of his in the forestry department allowed him to have a key to a gated area so he could visit any time. It is unclear if his friend knew his intentions were to poach the wildlife, but that is exactly what he was doing when he visited. In one of his trips, he opened the gate and drove his truck to an area known as 4 Points. Just as he crested a hill, he was shocked to see Department of the Interior, as well as Bureau of Land Management vehicles, all over the place, searching a campsite. CS mentioned that all of the men standing around were in full uniform, and all were armed. Once noticed, the men grabbed hold of CS, took his rifle, and hauled him off for questioning as to why he was in the area, and he said it lasted 7 to 8 hours. After a while, a forestry official recognized CS as a friend and managed to set him free. However, before leaving, he was strictly told never to come back. During his interrogation, it quickly became clear that what was being investigated was that a Sasquatch had recently been through the campground, had torn up the place, moved a huge garbage dumpster, and even killed a few campers. No clues are given as to how he came to this conclusion. CS did later mention that he recalled the air having a very pungent, musty smell to it, which is often described of Bigfoot sightings. After this, the whole thing went silent, and not even a mention in the local newspapers. Apparently in the late 80s, early 90s, a Bigfoot investigator took interest in the story, and during his research came across the former Bishop, California police officer who collaborated the previous story. The officer even stated that the incident sent shockwaves throughout all the law enforcement agencies in the area, but they had been sworn to secrecy over the event. This story was later printed in the 1992 edition of Bigfoot investigator Ray Crow's The Track Record. In trying to find more details behind this encounter, I came across an interesting pattern where all media retelling this story as a singular topic were being removed from existence. I hope the same doesn't happen for me. Delving a bit further, it is stated that there are no reports of this attack, and many would assume that there would at least be something said about the dead campers. When I replaced Bigfoot with bear in my searches, I found a few similar instances mentioned briefly involving grizzly bears. What makes this even more intriguing is that officially, grizzly bears are considered extinct in California. I normally don't do this, but a few questions arose about this story that I would like to address. The first is that many don't believe a forest ranger would allow someone into the area. Granted, I don't doubt the ranger didn't know CS was poaching. Even if he figured one guy poaching wouldn't cause that much trouble, hiding the gunshots would prove quite problematic. Now, when I was in college, I worked the weekends as a park ranger trainee, where I had a uniform, name tag, and responsibility. Obviously, I became very close to the park personnel. A few years after I was done working there, I returned to the park and stayed very late. Normally, all guests are required to leave public areas at a certain time. A ranger truck pulled up, telling me to get moving, until he realized it was me and said, "Oh, it's you. Well, have fun and try not to wreck the place." Point of the story is, yes, you can make friends with rangers, and yes, they will let you bend the rules. Another point is that people say the area mentioned, 4 Points, doesn't exist. This is true, but there is a Fort Jeffrey campground in the same area. A lot of times names mentioned could be local names given to an area that you won't find on a map. Growing up, we had a fishing spot around our house that we called the Big Hole, but you won't find that on any map of the area. Yet, people we grew up with know exactly the area we're talking about. Other people mention that the obvious reference behind a government cover-up is suspicious. There are reports of this happening, including the Bigfoot claiming to have been burned in a forest fire in Battle Mountain. Interestingly, there is a report of a woman suing California for claiming she was attacked by a black bear when she knows it was a Bigfoot. Although, after reading about her encounter, I am confused, since I don't understand how just seeing a Sasquatch constitutes an attack. In her claims, she just wants the Sasquatch to be recognized as existing, rather than being covered up. And this all came to light in March of 2018. I am not defending the story presented by Rich Grumley, as it all could be a tall tale, but it is best not to rule out things without knowing that strange parts of the story could be accurate. But again, who knows, it could have simply been a bear also. Moving on, we find an encounter that I wouldn't consider an attack, but more in line with a warning. We are jumping ahead in dates a little bit in order to save the best for last. In 2015, Wes Germer from the Sasquatch Chronicle podcast and his team ventured into the East Texas piney woods near Houston, Texas, with a man named Bob Garrett and his sons as guides. For posterity, the area is part of the Sam Houston National Forest. The whole purpose of the trip was to attempt to locate the elusive creature of our previous 2 videos, Bigfoot. After making camp, Bob and Wes were talking around the campfire while the rest of the crew were scouting out the surrounding areas. Suddenly, they kept hearing loud crashing sounds in the forest, and at first thought it was one of their party members, until they noticed this thing was far from the visible lights of the rest of the crew. Even though it was assumed that the sounds were as close as 40 feet away, no signs of what was causing it could be seen. Wes stated that at one point, the being burst into the underbrush so fast that it seemed to cover 100 to 150 yards within a matter of seconds. At one point, the men decided to try to move in on the creature since it was close enough that they could hear it breathing. This proved to be a big mistake. Before getting too close, they heard what was described as the sound of a helicopter's blades. The men all ducked down preparing for what came, and to their shock saw a huge log smash into a tree near them. The log hadn't been rolled down a hill, rather it had been thrown by an unseen assailant. The men pressed on, but kept claiming that the whole time they kept having to avoid parts of logs, tree branches, and stones that were constantly being thrown in their direction. It is worth noting, Garrett mentioned that none of the projectiles hit their mark, and it was assumed that the creature was just trying to scare them off. Later it would come out that Garrett and his sons had similar encounters in previous outings. At one time they became trapped in their truck as the debris from trees being thrown was becoming too much. At another time in 2014, they found an old cabin that had been rooted through, and again had to take refuge inside as trees, logs, and rocks started raining down on them. Bob even stated that while in the cabin, you could hear the Sasquatch running around outside. Oddly enough, when Wes Germer was asked about what he encountered, he said he didn't think it was a Bigfoot, but rather a werewolf. Personally, from looking into this story, I think Bob Garrett and his sons might want to steer clear of that forest before those warnings become something more severe. Now we end our two-part Sasquatch series with one of the most interesting and thought-provoking encounters so far, which occurred in the year 2000 in Honobia, Oklahoma. A man simply known as the name Mike and his family had bought property in the area where he built a farm. A few months after living in their home, they suddenly started to hear strange knocking sounds on the side of their house and on the front door. At one point they even caught sight of a dark humanoid figure standing off of their property that was said to stand around 8 feet tall. Not long after this, they discovered that 30 of their chickens had been taken, and a whole stockpile of deer meat was stolen from their shed, and the door had been completely ripped off its hinges. If that wasn't bad enough, many times through the night, the whole family would be awoken by the sounds of booming wails deep in the surrounding forest. Finally, having enough of the activity, Mike and his brother Tim stood guard over the house to try to catch who had been tormenting the family. At night, a man-like hairy face appeared at one of the house's windows and growled at the two men. They both fired their weapons at it and ran out onto the porch to follow it down. Before getting too far, they saw the creature slump down and drop to the ground. Suddenly, 3 more of the same creatures appeared from the forest, gathered up the body, and walked away. The following night, the other creatures took to attacking the house, apparently in revenge of their fallen member. They threw stones, tried to get into the house windows and doors, and even started punching the walls. According to the story, these attacks didn't let up until the family finally moved away. If this story is to be believed, especially with the vague names, it is one of the few sightings that convey that Sasquatch do bury their dead. It also is interesting that the events took a similar turn to that of the story of Ape Canyon that Fred Beck described in Mount St. Helens. It is worth noting that, coincidentally, Honobia, Oklahoma to this day has annual Bigfoot festivals where they have fundraisers, 5K runs, food, and crafts. It really seems like a fun event, especially since they provide scholarships to local kids in the area also. What a great way to show the good in cryptozoology. Last week, I ended my video with a special announcement stating that I'll feature questions asked by you in a video coming soon. Before you get worried, this is still happening, and it isn't too late to submit your questions in the comment section or via my social media with #AskBen. The response has been really good, and while looking over the questions, there are quite a few that have me really excited to provide an answer to. It really was an odd situation for me, as one of the rare times I actually had a couple weeks worth of topics that I wanted to cover, but it did mess me up a bit. In my previous video, I stated I was going to be making this video this week, but after reading some of your questions, I really wanted to make the #AskBen video this week. I had to buckle down and keep my schedule, but I promise next week, #AskBen will be the video topic. Also, before ending this, if your question isn't featured next week, I assure you that it will be in a follow-up video a couple weeks afterwards. If you haven't yet done so, please consider subscribing to my channel for more videos like this, and I would greatly appreciate it if you could share my content with someone you know who might enjoy this type of genre. With that, be safe, and I'll see you in the next one. Later.